Hi everyone, welcome back to another video on material from Teaching by Principles by Brown and Lee. This time we're going to take a look at a chapter called Techniques, Textbooks, and Materials. So basically what we're looking at in this material is what are the different types of techniques at a more macro level that you can do in your class, and then of course some keynotes about choosing your textbook and adding some more extra materials into your classes. All right, so here we go. Okay, so to start off, we have a few definitions, okay? So we've got task, activity, procedure, and technique. Because they're quite similar and there is some overlap between them. So we have some actual definitions that we can give to each one. So a task is a series of techniques that are related to real-world communicative goals. So that's why we'll have task-based teaching. It matches that definition. Okay, then we have activity, which is where students follow some directions from the teacher to try and meet an objective by carrying out a number of actions. Okay, then a procedure. Now these are the in-class techniques or behaviors or practices which occur while teaching a language based on a desired method. So usually when you make your lesson plan, you'll have your procedures listed down in order, what's first, what's second, things like that. Okay, and then last one is technique. So technique is kind of an umbrella term, I think, for most of these. Basically, it includes all tasks and activities that teachers and students perform in the classroom. So you can see there's some overlap here. If you want to be more specific, you can call something a task or an activity, but you can also just call them all techniques as well. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about in terms of techniques is what is called the manipulation communication continuum. So you can imagine that this little square can be pushed over to the manipulative side and then can be pushed over to the communicative side. Here we're talking about tasks or techniques. In that manipulative is more where they're teacher controlled. Okay, the teacher controls the input, the teacher controls the output. And I'll give you some examples later on. And then communicative, of course, is kind of self-explanatory. The tasks are more based on communicative functions. Students have open-ended responses. It's a little bit more natural and authentic and more difficult because if the teacher is not controlling the output, students could have an unlimited number of responses and make lots of mistakes while they're doing it. Okay, so in terms of beginners, now a lot of people will say that beginners, because they don't have the language proficiency yet, so probably you need to be more on the manipulative side, not in the communicative side, but that's not necessarily true. Yes, you have to have more teacher-centered instruction at the beginning. You need to have more control because you're trying to guide them to learn, right? But at the same time, you can start the communicative process. It's hard, especially at the very, very beginning, because they don't have any linguistic ability in English. But you can start with simple questions, right? Like, how are you? What's your name? Where do you live? And so on. You can see the different questions on the screen. Now, it may seem a little bit boring if every day you're doing the same thing, but actually it's really important that you do this because, as I've written down below, if you start communication at the very beginning levels, now what you're doing is promoting fluency and effective communicative competence at the higher levels. You have to start at some time. You shouldn't wait until they're at an appropriate level, because now what you've got is these students with lots of information in their brain, but they still don't know how to speak it. So that should start at an early stage. Okay. So when we're talking about techniques, basically we have two ends here. We have the controlled and then we have the open-ended. So you can see there's a comparison and contrast here. So on the control end, the teacher restricts the communication, which means I control what your output is because I want you to get the correct answer. I want you to use the form that I want you to practice. And then of course on open-ended, students are free to improvise. Control, the teacher elicits an intended response, and then open-ended, students' responses are spontaneous. Controlled, the teacher emphasizes the form. Open-ended, students focus on meaning or communication. So this is a big difference. In a controlled technique, what we want the students to just use the form. And so it becomes a technique of accuracy, right? I don't want you to make mistakes. I'm sure you're all familiar with this in your classes. But if it's open-ended, now our focus isn't on the technique, the form as much. It's on meaning and communication. Now, sometimes I've seen where teachers give students a chance to use open-ended responses, but at the same time, they want to control the form. Excuse me. This doesn't always work, because if you are thinking about meaning, it's really hard to focus on form at the same time. So you have to think about that as a teacher. Excuse me. If you want your students to really use their critical thinking skills and come up with some more deeper meaning type responses, then you should leave the form to the side a little bit and just let them say what they're trying to say. Okay, then the last one is teacher monitors the students' responses, and of course open-ended, they're relatively unmonitored, which is kind of what I was talking about. Okay, so here's some examples of this type of controlled and open-ended, okay? So we have some new names. We have mechanical, meaningful, and communicative techniques. So we're gonna use drilling to show you the difference, okay? So a mechanical drill, I'm sure you're familiar with this. The teacher says, I went to the store yesterday. Students repeat, I went to the store yesterday. Then the teacher says, bank. Students say, I went to the bank yesterday. In the morning, I went to the bank in the morning, and on and on and on. In this type of drill, there's only one correct answer, and there's no connection to reality. Nobody went to the store yesterday. Nobody, well, maybe, but probably not, right? It's not something that you really did. It's just for fluency, pronunciation, and trying to overlearn this particular simple past tense form. Okay, now we have a meaningful drill where we try to add some reality to it. So the teacher still wants to practice by drilling, but she's gonna look around and try to use something that's really happening. So the woman is outside, and then she points to a window. Where is she, Hiro? And then Hiro says, the woman is outside. Right, she's outside. Keiko, where is she? She's outside. Good, Keiko, she's outside. Now class, we are inside. Hiroko, where are we? We are inside. So even though it's still kind of a drill, but it's more almost like conversation, the teacher's still controlling it, but she's trying to connect it at least to reality so that students are kind of learning in context. Like if I make you repeat, I went to the bank yesterday, there's no connection to reality because you didn't go to the bank yesterday. So you don't have any mental images to connect it with. But in this kind of meaningful drilling, I see the woman outside. I'm saying the woman is outside. And so I am learning it in context. Even though it may be a little bit artificial, it's still connected to reality. Okay, and then we've got form-focused communicative practice. So here's a way that you can still focus on the form while doing communication. So that's one of the things that teachers worry about is, well, if I have this kind of open-ended response, then what about the student's grammar? So you can still focus on form while communicating. So here's an example. The teacher says, good morning, class. Last weekend, I went to a restaurant and I ate salmon. Juan, what did you do last weekend? So you can see the form here. They're practicing the past tense, right? And Juan says, I went to park and play soccer. And the teacher says, Juan, you play soccer or you played soccer? And Juan says, I played soccer. Good. Ing, did you go to the park last weekend? No. What did you do? I went to a movie. Great. And what did you do, Faye? So it's actual conversation while really focusing on the simple past tense. And the teacher will still give some feedback while they're doing it. Okay. So in your textbook, if you have it, there are 2 pages, 226 and 227, which they call a taxonomy of techniques. And it goes from controlled to semi-controlled to totally open-ended. And they have an explanation for all of them. And so what I did is I just put a few in here kind of to give you the general gist of how this works. So in terms of control techniques, here are some where the teacher is in control and the students are basically just following what the teacher wants. That's input and output. So for example, content explanation. That's like a lecture, right? Teacher is giving all the information directly to the students. Role play demonstration. The teacher is showing students how to do it. Some kind of dialogue or narrative presentation. So this is passive reception. The students are just listening. Dialogue or narrative recitation. So in this case, I give the students the dialogue and they say what I want them to say. They're not writing their own lines. Reading aloud in class, question and answer, but the type of questions will be display questions. Display questions, if I haven't mentioned it already, those are questions in which the teacher already knows the answer. So how's the weather today? What's your name? What day is it today? These questions are just for practice only. I already know the answer before I'm asking. Drilling, which we talked about, translating, dictation, copying, reviewing, and testing. These are all different forms of control techniques that you can do in the classroom. Okay, now the second one is semi-controlled. So in semi-controlled, there are a few here like brainstorming, storytelling. So storytelling will be semi-controlled in the fact that I give you the story that I want you to tell, or I give you some clues and then you have to make the story on your own. So it's a little bit of part teacher, part student. Question and answer again, but this time referential questions. So these are your deeper questions in which I don't know the answer probably, and students maybe need to explain. Cued narrative dialogue. So again, I give you cues and then you create your own dialogue. Information transfer and then wrap-ups. So these are semi-controlled. And then we have, which are the totally open-ended techniques. So role plays, games, student reports, any kind of problem solving or inquiry-based learning. Let students do a drama, simulation, an interview, discussion, composition, where students are in 100% control of the output that they give. There's no guidance from the student. Now, of course, when you are designing your course, you need to keep these in mind that you're not always in the control techniques. Yes, there's definitely a place for these. Even in university, I will do drilling in my pronunciation class sometimes. That's more for practice and to let students hear what I consider the correct way to say it. But you also need to get over to these open-ended techniques as well. And I think in textbooks, a lot of the textbooks today have all three of these, but most teachers will focus on the controlled and maybe semi-controlled. And when it gets to the open-ended ones, they will say things like, oh, I don't have time to do that. I need to do a practice test. But these open-ended techniques are very important as well for their communicative ability. Okay, so the last part of the video today is that criteria for selecting and evaluating a textbook. So as I mentioned in class, the textbook should not be the curriculum, right? And when you choose your textbook, you should already have your course designed up to a point. Of course, you need to look at the textbook too to know what the tasks and things are, but you should know what your goals and objectives are. Okay, so there are 20 questions here that you should consider before in the process of selecting your textbook. So they also cut it into different categories. So the first one is program and course. So does the textbook support the goals of the curriculum and program? Is the textbook part of a series? And is the level appropriate for your students? So make sure you're choosing the right one. I've actually seen this in elementary schools before where one school in grade 5, they're doing book 5, but in the other one in grade 5, they're doing book 3. So in two schools, the kids are the same age, their proficiency should be similar. They're 2 books ahead. That's weird. Are a sufficient number of the course objectives addressed by the textbook? Remember, you write your objectives first and then choose your textbook. Is the textbook designed for learners of the appropriate age, group, ability, purpose, background? is the textbook visually appealing, and is the layout motivating? Like when students open it, do they feel like, wow, this is pretty cool, I want to learn about this? Does the textbook have cultural biases in it? If it does, of course, you don't want to use that kind. Okay, the next category is approach. So are the roles of the teacher and the students in line with current knowledge and beliefs about second language acquisition? So of course, you should know something about how your students are learning a second language or foreign language, right? And does that book actually set it up in a way where students are, like for example, we talk about teacher and student-centered learning. So does it allow you to teach it in a way where the students can be in control sometimes as well? Just as an example. Okay, number 8, do the sequencing, difficulty levels, pacing, variety represented in the textbook reflect current knowledge about second language acquisition? So basically, do you have a current book? I mean, if it's outdated, maybe it's not going to work. And does the approach challenge learners to use and develop their own strategies and work toward autonomy? This is important. It should give them some suggestions on their own language learning strategies, and maybe it should have something about learning styles as well. Okay, the next one is skills. So does the textbook take into account varying learner styles and preferences as they develop their skills? Are the skills that are promoted in the textbook appropriate for the course? So there has to be a match between the skills that you want them to learn, of course. And does the textbook offer adequate guidance for the students as they acquire the target skills? Okay, next one is techniques and supplementary materials. So do the techniques in the textbook promote learners' language development? It's really important that you actually read through them and figure it out. You don't want to get a textbook and then as you're teaching you realize, actually all the techniques in here are not good. They don't match my philosophy. And so you just skip them all. Then why did you get the book, right? Is there a balance between controlled and open-ended techniques? It's really nice if you get a textbook that does that for you so you don't have to redesign the whole course yourself. Do the techniques reinforce what the students have already learned? And do the tasks increase in complexity and difficulty? So you want it to get progressively more difficult. Are the techniques used in a way that are motivating to students? Like, for example, if there's a game in the book, is it actually fun? And is it something that the students will really want to play? Do they put songs in the book that no student will ever want to sing? And do they use poems? You have to really look at these things and ask yourself, will my students really do that? Will they be motivated to do that? Okay, then very, very important, 17 and 18. Does the textbook provide supplementary worksheets, quizzes, CDs, online exercises, anything extra that you can use for teaching so you don't have to continually design your own materials? And last one, is there a accompanying teacher's guide? Always check the teacher's guide before you choose a textbook. Maybe they have a lot of extra materials for you, so it can save you some time. Okay, last one are the practical issues. These ones, of course, is the textbook available? Is it cost effective? Can you get it in a timely manner? And more importantly, is it available as an ebook? All right, everybody, that's it for today. A little bit short and sweet. I hope you all are well, and I'll see you next time. Take care.